What if I told you that the most iconic airplane of the 20th century, the majestic queen of the skies, the Boeing 747, was born not from an engineering dream, but from an ultimatum? And what if the famous hump that housed luxury lounges and grand pianos wasn't a symbol of glamour, but an insurance policy against Boeing's own imminent bankruptcy? Today, we look at the 747 with an almost sacred nostalgia, remembering an era when flying was an event. But behind that unmistakable silhouette lies a story of risk, desperation, and a $2 billion bet, more than the GDP of many countries at the time, that could have wiped Boeing off the map forever. This is not just the story of an airplane, it is the chronicle of how a single decision made under extreme pressure rewrote the rules of the global economy, democratized the skies, and paradoxically planted the seeds of the bus with wings aviation world we know today. Prepare to discover how the need for a cargo backup plan dictated the design of the most beloved passenger plane in history, and how one man's ambition forced a company to risk everything. This is the untold story of the Boeing 747. To understand the scale of this gamble, we need to go back to the 60s. Jet aviation, led by the revolutionary Boeing 707, had shrunk the world. The problem? It did its job too well. Airports were congested, airlines struggled to meet explosive demand, and one legendary figure saw both an opportunity and a bottleneck. Juan Trippe, the visionary and ruthless CEO of Pan American World Airways, was not just a Boeing customer, he was the market's architect. Trippe had a simple and brutally ambitious vision. He wanted a plane that could carry twice as many passengers as the 707, reducing the cost per seat by 30%. He didn't ask, he demanded. In a handshake deal with Boeing's president, William Allen, Trippe sealed a pact that had no formal contract, only the word of two industry titans. It was a demand that bordered on the impossible. The engine technology of the time could not support such a scale, airport infrastructure was not ready, and most importantly, Boeing itself did not have the capital to finance a project of this magnitude. It was a blank check, signed with the ink of Trippe's ambition, and backed by Boeing's uncertain future. Most people, even enthusiasts, do not grasp the true nature of the risk Boeing took. It wasn't just a matter of stretching an existing airplane, it required creating a monster from scratch. The fundamental challenge lay in the engines. To lift an aircraft of over 300 tons, a new type of engine was needed, the high bypass turbofan. Pratt & Whitney was tasked with developing the JT9D, an engine as revolutionary as the plane itself, but one that did not yet exist. Boeing was designing an airframe for a heart that wasn't yet beating. Furthermore, global infrastructure would have to be reinvented. Airports would need longer runways, larger terminals, double-decker jet, bridges and tow tractors the size of small houses. Boeing wasn't just selling a plane, it was selling an entirely new ecosystem, forcing a global upgrade that no one had asked for, except Pan Am. The financial risk was astronomical. The development cost of $2 billion, equivalent to over $16 billion today, was more than the market value of the company itself. Boeing had to go into massive debt, betting every dollar it had, and many it didn't, on a single project. A failure wouldn't mean a loss, it would mean the end of Boeing. And herein lies one of the most fascinating secrets of the 747. Its iconic hump was never designed to be a luxury lounge. It was an engineering solution to an obsolescence problem that didn't even exist yet. In the 1960s, everyone in the industry, including Boeing, believed that the future of passenger flight was supersonic. The 747 was seen as a temporary bridge, a plane that, in less than a decade, would be relegated to cargo flights. With this forecast in mind, engineers needed a design that would allow for easy and efficient cargo loading through the front of the aircraft. The solution? Move the cockpit up, creating a nose that could be hinged and opened. This design decision, purely functional and geared toward a freighter future, created a useless space behind the cockpit. It was only as an afterthought that airlines like Pan Am decided to turn that space into the most famous lounge in aviation history. The hump was, in fact, Boeing's insurance policy. If the supersonic era arrived and the passenger 747 became obsolete, the fleet could be easily converted into profitable freighters, saving the company from ruin. What looked like luxury was actually the project's survival. Behind the billion-dollar figures and strategic decisions, there was a human story of monumental sacrifice. To build the 747, Boeing first needed to build the world's largest factory by volume. They bought a 780-acre plot of land in Everett, Washington, which was a muddy, forested swamp. The task of transforming that place into the cradle of the Queen of the Skies was given to a team of 50,000 workers who would later become known as the Incredibles. Led by engineer Malcolm Stamper, they worked 24/7 in brutal conditions. Rain and mud were constant. The factory roof was being built at the same time. The first 747 prototypes were already being assembled on the factory floor. They weren't just building a plane, they were inventing manufacturing. Processes on a scale never seen before. It was an industrial city erected in record time, powered by coffee, dedication, and a sense of historic purpose. Many of these engineers, mechanics, and builders mortgaged their homes and moved their families, believing in the Boeing dream. The pride they felt was not just professional, it was personal. They were the unsung fathers of the plane that would change the world. The path to the first flight was anything but smooth. The Pratt & Whitney JT-9D engines were a nightmare. They suffered from overling of the casing under the engine's own weight, causing failures and stalls. During testing, 28 engines were destroyed. Boeing had completed fuselages in Everett, but had no viable engines to install. They were so-called gliders, engineless planes that piled up outside the factory like silent monuments to a billion-dollar problem. The pressure was unbearable. The banks were threatening to cut off funding. Pan Am, which had already invested heavily in marketing and infrastructure for the jumbo jet, was growing impatient. On September 30th, 1968, the day of the official rollout, the plane, christened City of Everett, was towed out of the hangar for the world to see. It was a facade of confidence. Behind the scenes, engineers knew the engines were still unreliable. Nevertheless, on February 9th, 1969, the 747 made its first flight. It was a success, a moment of relief and triumph that masked the financial turbulence that was yet to come. The inaugural flight was a spectacle for the world, but for Boeing the celebration was short-lived. The true test of survival was just beginning. Soon after the euphoria, the American economy plunged into a severe recession. The airlines that Boeing had expected to line up to buy its new giant cancelled or postponed their orders. Demand for air travel plummeted, and the 747, designed for a booming market, suddenly seemed like an anachronistic colossus, too big and too expensive for a world in crisis. Boeing was left with crippling debt and a nearly idle production line. The situation in its hometown of Seattle became so desperate that it became known as the Boeing bust. The company was forced to lay off more than 60,000 employees. The crisis was immortalized in a grim billboard near the airport. Will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights? Paradoxically, it was this near bankruptcy that forced the most profound change in aviation. The few airlines, like Pan Am, that were already operating the 747 had a monumental problem: how to fill hundreds of empty seats. The solution was brutal and transformative: drastically lower the price of tickets. The 747's economy of scale, born of immense financial risk, became the engine that democratized the skies, allowing millions of people to fly for the first time. The $2 billion bet not only saved Boeing by a thread, but, unintentionally, transformed the act of flying from an exclusive luxury into mass transportation. The legacy of the Boeing 747 transcends engineering. It is the perfect materialization of the economist Joseph Schumpeter's theory of creative destruction. The theory posits that innovation does not just add something new to the market, but in the process ruthlessly destroys the old. The 747 wasn't just a bigger plane. It was a mass extinction event for the aviation logic that preceded it. Before it, airlines operated on the basis of frequency, using fleets of Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8s on multiple daily departures. The Queen of the Skies made this strategy obsolete overnight. Why fly 3 times with 150 passengers when you could fly once with 400 at a drastically lower cost per seat? The 747 didn't compete with existing planes. It made them economically unviable on high-density routes. It cannibalized the market to create a new one, centered on hubs and long-haul flights. This disruption forced the hand of the entire industry. McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed were compelled to respond, creating the revered Triges, the DC-10 and the L-1011 TriStar. They were fantastic aircraft, loved by pilots and passengers, but they were born as a reaction, not a revolution. They were designed to operate in a world whose economic rules had already been rewritten by the 747. And herein lies the painful irony that many of us feel today. The same force that inaugurated the golden age with its lounges and sense of space was the one that, taken to its logical conclusion, ended it. The relentless pressure for low costs, initiated by the jumbo's economy of scale, led airlines to eliminate luxury, add more seats, and transform the magical experience of flying into a commoditized form of transport. The roar of the four engines was not just power, it was poetry, but it was also the sound of a paradigm being broken forever. The 747 gave the world the wings to fly, but the price of that freedom was the soul of an era that, once lost, could never be recovered. Today, when we look to the skies, we see the direct descendants of that audacious bet. Efficient twin-engine jets like the 777, 787, and a 350 dominate the routes that the 747 pioneered. They are the result of the economic logic that the Queen of the Skies forced upon the world, the relentless pursuit of efficiency and lower cost per seat. The 747 was so successful in its mission to massify air transport that, in the end, it became a victim of its own legacy, surpassed by aircraft that learned the lessons it taught. The colossus that nearly bankrupted Boeing ultimately saved it and secured its dominance for decades, but its time as the monarch of the skies has come to an end. Watching it retire from passenger fleets around the world is bittersweet. It's the end of a chapter. For many of us, engineers, pilots, crew, and passengers, it is not just a plane being taken out of service. It is a part of our personal and professional history that is bidding farewell. Today, flying feels more like riding a bus, but there was a time when every flight was magical, an event to be celebrated. The 747 may have disappeared from the boarding gates, but its soul still flies in every modern airplane. Its iconic hump, born of necessity, and its four engines, which sang a symphony of power, remain a heritage of an era of daring. But what about you? Did you get the chance to fly on the Queen of the Skies? What is your most striking memory aboard this legendary airplane? Share your experience in the comments.